what things should I consider with remote working?
Hmm. Yeah, that's quite a big topic, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so some of the things that I've been thinking about were things like the personality types in your workforce, in your
Yeah.
team. Who are more introverted by nature, they don't miss company as much as the extroverts will, and they will adapt to it more easily, whereas extroverts absolutely crave that face-to-face contact, and even Zoom sometimes doesn't do it for them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The extroverts always like to be not necessarily the center of attention, but they like to have that communication, don't they? And they like to know what's going on and be part of something. Where I think the introverts, they do like to withdraw a little bit, and actually they're not that bothered as to whether they have that social interaction or not.
No, I think they like the support of the team, to know that they're there to call on, but
Yeah.
they actually also welcome the ability to focus and get in the zone without a lot of distractions going on around them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, it depends, doesn't it, on in terms of the role that the person's doing as well. Because
Mm.
if you're perhaps in a more creative role, then maybe you do need that, that communication, that free flowing. And sometimes you don't necessarily get that on Zoom, which can be really tough. And so how would you kind of come about doing that? So if you had someone who was an extrovert or needed that, that communication, but they're using Zoom. Have you got any kind of tips to try to build that?
Yeah, well, I think it's about recreating as much of the atmosphere as you can, as if they were at work. So perhaps, obviously, you've got to have formal Zoom meetings, but maybe there are other opportunities like coffee morning Zoom meetings, or just brainstorm new Zoom meetings where, yeah, maybe you might need a facilitator for it, but doesn't have a strict agenda, but it's just about pooling ideas around a particular topic.
Yeah. What I also tend to say to some of my clients is to kind of use like Skype as well. So when you can just Skype message, instant message people quickly and just do
Mm,
really quick phone calls. So it might even be on WhatsApp.
yeah.
Sometimes I just kind of say to them, use that, because it's really good to just kind of go, oh, I've got a quick question. Can I ask you about this? And, sometimes it's a bit of hit and miss. Sometimes you'll get somebody at the right time, and then sometimes obviously the call will just drop. And I don't think you can ever replicate exactly what you had in the office,
Mm.
but it's as close to as possible. So it's really tough, actually, really tough.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think, it's a good point about using as many different communication channels as possible. I think there's often an over reliance on email and
Yeah,
picking up the phone, or even working together with an online facility in the background.
yeah,
Might,
absolutely.
if you're working on the same project, it might be you don't have to have that intense interaction that you often have on Zoom. You can have times when you're talking a bit, then you're working a bit, and then talking a bit.
I suppose it just depends on how structured you can or cannot make your day. And then the other thing that always comes up, isn't there, is you've kind of got that work-life balance. So even if you are quite structured in your work, if you've got small children about, then perhaps they kind of get in the way. And I know sometimes we've even had a call, haven't we? And I think, my little girl ended up
Yeah.
coming up and it was like, oh, apologies, but she's here type thing. So maybe that's something else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's another thing to be considering, is the well-being of the people that you're working who are working for you, and that, what's their family situation. What are the things that they've also, in some situations where remote work is taking place, where the kids perhaps aren't at school, it's a school holiday, what other things are going on in their lives.
Yeah. I think as well, you're absolutely right. It does depend on what's going on in their lives, but it also depends on like their environment just in terms of where they've got to work. And I've
Mm,
spoken to quite a few people. I've said, are you really enjoying working from home, or would you rather be in the office? And it's a real mixed bag. And I
yeah.
think I think the reason why is some people are saying, well, I'm just in my kitchen or I'm in my bedroom working. And I think that environment has a massive impact on their productivity and their well-being.
Yeah.
And I mean, from a company point of view, there's obviously things that you need to do from, you know, like workstation assessments and making sure that from a health and safety point of view, they're all set up and they're ready to work and they're safe to do so. But then I would imagine, you know, from a well-being perspective, and from a, you know, from your perspective as a coach, that can be quite worrying if they don't have that environment right.
Yeah, absolutely. Even down to, yeah, the kind of table, the chair, the lighting, all of those sorts of things, the amount of space they have.
Yeah.
And then there's also that when you're working from home, how do you distinguish between work and the rest of your life? It's just, the danger is that it merges, and that can burn people out.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I know, like, from experience, it's really difficult because sometimes you just get in that zone and hours can pass. And then you think, oh, I've not made a cup of tea. I've not spoken to anybody else. I've not exercised today. And actually that well-being part, you almost just, it goes down the list. You just push it right down.
Yeah. There's nobody around to say, oh, let's go and have a cup of coffee. I've got time for a break now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody to remind you.
No, absolutely. And I think, you know, businesses need to be aware of that and perhaps put in place some, you know, some breakout time. So I know some systems, actually, it can have it so it pops up and it says things like, you know, you need to take a break now, or maybe, as you mentioned earlier, about coffee morning. So scheduling in coffee mornings, and people then have to join, maybe not every day, but that might be something, especially like with your introverts, if they don't want to go and they're quite happy sat there, just saying you've got to go to at least one a week. That might help.
Yeah, so especially as people who are more introverted are less likely to initiate contact even when they want it. So I think some scheduled things that people can dip into is a really good idea.
Yeah. I think as well, with regards to kind of the policies and procedures that businesses need to be aware of. So, you know, you've got people working at home and things have changed. It's not, you know, their predominant place of work is now in the office. So all the policies and procedures around office working, we need to really make sure that we've bolstered those policies to support our employees at home. And, you know, we've already mentioned about the workstation assessments, the equipment that they've got, making sure the technology, but also things like security and data handling. You know, it doesn't change. And around GDPR and, you know, the Information Commissioner's Office, they're not going to turn around and say, oh, you're working from home, it doesn't matter if there's a data breach. They're even going to be hotter on it now than perhaps they were before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it all needs thinking through.
Yeah, it's really, when you start looking at it, it just kind of explodes into this massive thing. And you think, I did not even imagine working from home was going to have so many different elements to really think about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another thing to be thinking about with remote working is, how do you get people to continue to collaborate over, especially where there are cross-functional teams and joint projects and so on.
Yeah. Have you got any tips then on that one at all?
Well, again, I think it's helping people to realize, first of all, that the difference has to be factored in.
Yeah.
That I know from people I'm coaching, they're missing that kind of thing where they'll perhaps go past somebody's chair and say, oh, by the way, or, you know, all those incidental things that help them to collaborate well. Yeah. Or I've got this problem, have you got any ideas, or had any experience with this? And so it definitely has to, you know, there has to be some arrangements made to help them to collaborate further. And I think there are, like we were saying earlier, there are various online tools that can help. Yeah. Instant messaging, video conferencing, but also some of the old-fashioned ways, like having a chat on the phone.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things can help. But it's just, I suppose, getting people to talk about it and say, you know, discuss how they're going to manage the new situation rather than just falling into it. without preparation.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is that maybe we could learn from is some of the companies, so like Google, I know they always used to do a kind of, and I don't know if they still do, but it was in the news and things, wasn't it, whereby they would do 80% working on your usual day-to-day, and then 20% was you could work on whatever you wanted to work on. And I think that could be really good to consider with remote working, just to break down what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, but also to have that cross collaboration with other people.
Yeah.
And just to do something different.
Yes, bringing that variety.
Yeah, absolutely, because I really think that is crucial when working from home. And I think one of the biggest tips I've probably got is to try to structure it and to try to have set times when you're doing work, when you're doing, family life, when you've got bits to do. And one of the things that I'm finding with companies is that the whole 9 till 5 is gone.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, people are getting on at 7 in the morning, then they're going and they're dropping the kids off for the school run at 9. Then they might take a little bit of a longer lunch, but then they work again later. And so it's a real mixture now. And I think businesses are, they need to kind of come on board with that and not necessarily being so rigid in their approach to it's 9 till 5, you must do 8 hours or 9 hours, whatever work it is.
Yes, I think you're right there, to have some more flexible working, bearing in mind what people's lifestyles are like. I think by doing that, then they're more motivated and productive, rather than feeling, oh, I won't be able to get to that, or getting so stuck in their work that family gets neglected, and perhaps they feel like they're glued to their seats.
Yeah, I can imagine actually that you end up with, guilt on both sides, guilt that you're not paying the family enough time, and then also guilt that actually you've done your work, but you feel that you should be giving more because you're not there with your manager or with your team and being looked at. And so that can be a real pull, I would think, for quite a lot of people.
Yes, I suppose the other thing in managing all this, or in considering all this, is the managers that I'm coaching do tend to feel that remote managing is more difficult, again because of that they don't have that those incidental moments where perhaps they can see the body language of a member of their team, or a team member perhaps doesn't feel like they can interrupt a person and a manager in the same way as they can when they're in the same office. And having, if not exactly procedures, but having, giving thought to the strategy to how to manage people, how to keep them motivated, how to keep checking in with them without them feeling like you're checking up on them.
Yeah, and actually that's a really good point there, because I think that's really difficult to manage somebody remote when you don't, you can't see somebody. They're not just sat across from the desk and you can see that they've gone really insular and they're stressed or that. And I think, with Zoom, it's one of those things, isn't it, where they go, oh, you're dressed from the waist up. And sometimes I think like you can act, can't you? And it's like, I'm having a really bad day today and I'm really stressed out with all these things. And then actually you can get on a call and you say, hi, how are you doing? I'm very well, thanks. Yeah, not a problem. Everything's absolutely perfect. And I think actually there's a real big point there from a manager's perspective, whereby perhaps the employer needs to help train and coach them to maybe identify, okay, how can you read body language? What questions could you ask to try to get that person to open up and really, unpeel that onion to actually find out what's happening truthfully with that individual, rather than them portraying what they want you to see.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There are certain conventions, aren't they, that when we ask somebody how they are, that we don't tell them that we're having a bad day or that sort of thing. We just say fine, not bad, all of those sorts of things.
Are there any questions or tips, I know I'm putting you on the spot now, that perhaps you would encourage managers to actually ask their employees to try to find out what's really going on?
Yeah, I think the more open, curious questions would be useful, and things like, you know, what you're pleased with that you've done this week, or what have you learned? What have you been able to move forward? What have you found challenging? What resources or help do you think you'll need to complete that? You know, those sorts of probing questions.
Yeah, no, I think that's really key actually, because we can get bogged down, can't we, in just the work that we're doing. And have you done that project? Yes, right, great. I'll move on to the next one. And it's always about those deliverables. Or actually, that deliverable, we could have got it done quicker if we would have taken the time to understand actually what's going on with that person. Oh, it's a massive subject, isn't it? We could spend all day.
It's huge, yeah. I mean, there's so many things. So if we were to summarize it, then it would be, first of all, thinking about your people and the environment that they're in at home, and how to manage their morale, how to keep them motivated, make sure that you're keeping up with where they're at, all of those sorts of things. And then putting in place things to help them to share ideas and collaborate more.
Yeah. And I think it's also around kind of the structure, isn't it? And making sure that the basics and the fundamentals are there to support. And that's both, you know, on a work productivity perspective, and then also that, you know, mental and that physical, actually, their well-being, and just supporting the whole framework around that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's around technology. It's around risk assessments, all those policies and procedures, and thinking about performance management.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Huge amounts in there to consider when dealing with remote working.
Yes, and I think all of this, if it can be done collaboratively, you know, thinking it through with your team of managers, and the managers with their teams, then they're going to get a lot of useful feedback from the coalface, if you like, that will help inform how to manage all this. And also, they'll also get some good ideas too.
I think that's probably one of the biggest key takeaways, is when you're dealing with remote working, don't do it in isolation, do it collaboratively, and work together to try to find that solution for everybody.